Ladies and gentlemen, please have a good welcome for Nigel Farage.
Rollo has set this meeting up, and I know there are many people in this room tonight who come from a business background. So I want to perhaps expand a little on some of the themes that Stephen talked about. I was invited to Twickenham earlier this year for the England-France game, and I was invited by a firm of employment headhunters. And so at the lunch, I said, well, of course, over 70% of your laws don't come from the British government, they come from the European Union. And the chief executive said, oh, Nigel, no, you're way off being there, mate. He said, it's at least 95% of employment legislation comes from abroad. Now, we've touched tonight, our chairman and Stephen both touched tonight on the Agency Workers Directive. The Agency Workers Directive came into being on the 1st of October this year. And the Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne, not of course that he's ever had a job, but never mind, and George Osborne said that it was a pity, but there was nothing we could do about it. And the argument, ladies and gentlemen, has to be that if you're a nation, if you're a state, what you should do, if you're the Chancellor of the Exchequer, in the midst of a recession, when unemployment has reached a 17-year high, when youth unemployment has reached 20%, you should say, to hell with the Agency Workers Directive, we are going to put the interests of British people and British workers first. And the list goes on through health and safety, the Height at Ladders Directive. I mean, do we really need legislation to tell us that working on ladders is dangerous? I don't think we do. The madness of the environmental legislation. I mean, can you believe that when Chorus closed down in Redcar last year with a loss of 1,500 jobs, that Chorus were given, as part of the EU's carbon trading system, £300 million worth of carbon credits. They were paid 300 million sterling to close the factory in Redcar down and to relocate the whole lot to India. So even if we were concerned about CO2 emissions, and I'm rather more relaxed about it perhaps than some people, because it seems to me that volcanoes spew out rather more when they erupt than every factory in the world, but even if we were worried about it, the net effect on CO2 emissions globally has been zero. We are paying through the EU carbon scheme. British taxpayers are paying our manufacturing base to close down. It is complete and utter lunacy. And the worst of all of this is the political side of it. Because if we think the EU's carbon trading system is mad, if we think the Agency Workers Directive is bad for employment and particularly bad for young people, what can we as voters in this European Union model do? The answer is nothing. Nothing. We are rendered impotent because the sole ability to propose legislation in the EU and the sole ability to amend or change legislation in the EU rests with the unelected European Commission. Even if every single MP, if all 646 MPs in Westminster voted to get rid of the Agency Workers Directive, all the while we accept membership of this union, there is nothing they could do. By a margin of 10 to 1, our members of Parliament voted to say that prisoners should not get the vote. And yet they were told the very next day by Kenneth Clarke, our Justice Secretary, that the vote was null and void because we're signed up to the European Convention on Human Rights, and of course being a signatory to the European Convention on Human Rights is a prerequisite of EU membership. We were impotent then, and we're impotent over the economy. And the worry is that now, sector by sector, this new form of European government is taking control of the British economy. We've seen it in the fishing industry, of course, now for over 3 decades. I mean, what a remarkable situation that in what should be British territorial waters, we are allowed to catch by volume 18% of the fish that are ours, and the other 80% goes elsewhere. We know that, we've seen it. But what happened last year, I think, was far more sinister. And again, I'm picking up on Stephen's point about financial services. And when we talk about financial services, please don't think that we're just talking about bad or greedy bankers. We're not. The City of London and financial services is about insurance. It's about equities. It's about wealth management. It's about fund management. It's about foreign exchange trading. It's about spread betting. I throw that in because Stuart Wheeler's now our treasurer. I have to each time I speak. But it's about so many things that we in London have done fantastically well. And we've become the world's centre for all of these things. In October last year, the European Parliament approved a European Commission directive that means that now the entirety of what is Britain's biggest business is now to be regulated 100% by 3 new European regulatory authorities. And what makes me most angry about this is not the fact that the Lib Dems vote for this. Of course they would. And it's not that Labour vote for it, because we know that they're signed up to the EU model. What really makes me angry is this current Conservative Party masquerade as wanting to stand up for British business, and their own MEPs were 3-line whipped to support the transference of the regulation of Britain's biggest industry to 3 new European authorities. And ladies and gentlemen, believe you me, I am going to do my damnedest to make sure they pay a price for that. And what of trade? What of trade? We're living in a new global economy and nothing is going to change that. And in fact, as we in the EU decline, much of the new world is still growing. Much of it at 4 and 5% a year, as was mentioned earlier. And yet the most extraordinary thing about trade in the EU is that we, as the world's 5th largest merchanting and trading nation, are now completely forbidden, and I mean forbidden, from making our own trade deals with the rest of the world. This country has thrived and survived for over 5 centuries as a merchanting, trading nation. That is what we are. It's what we do. It's what we're good at. And we need to take back the ability to forge our own trade relationships with the rest of the world. And I tell you where a very good starting place would be. A very good starting place would be with an association of countries that now has within it 30% of the world's population, most of whom, William, have common law, all of whom speak English, many of whom are our own kith and kin. It's about time we re-established our relationships with trade, not just with our European neighbours, but with the Commonwealth. If we are going to have a future, a successful economic trading future, it's about time we grew up and recognised our future isn't Europe, our future is as a global trading nation. Now the question is, how do we do all of this? I predict tonight that British politics on this vital European question, which is racing up the agenda, isn't it, day by day by day, I predict that what will dominate politics over the next couple of years will be the promises of renegotiation. Yes, yes. Even Nick Clegg will promise to renegotiate, quite what I don't know. But renegotiation. We will be assured by a Conservative Party, the very party that signed us up to Rome without a referendum, remember? The very party that has been actually the party of Europe more than Labour over the last 4 decades, will be assured they're going to renegotiate. Well, ladies and gentlemen, believe me, the crisis in the EU and the crisis in the Eurozone is so great and so compelling that there is nobody there with the appetite to renegotiate. In fact, they're doing the very opposite to that. They are trying, the architects of this euro failure are trying to use this crisis to gain yet more power. There is no debate about giving power back to anybody. And anyway, because of the ratchet by which European rules are made, rules can be made by a majority vote, but can only be reversed by a unanimous vote.
Oh, yeah.
They're clever, this lot, aren't they? Yeah. I mean, they really are clever. I don't think there's any prospect of renegotiation. And whilst I understand the arguments that are made, I actually think that the British public, and I think now that many, many businesses too in this country are saying, look, what we want is the kind of deal that the Swiss have, the kind of deal that the Norwegians have. Both of those countries sell far more of their foreign produce to the European Union countries per capita than we do. And they do that through a simple free trade arrangement. They do that without membership of the European Union. And that's being offered to us by the people running the EU. Even Giscard d'Estaing, the grand, glorious, almost regal Giscard, the man that designed the European Constitution. And I remember the day that he launched it, and I was their chairman at the press conference, and a journalist asked a question and said, but Giscard, you talk with this treaty about a European foreign policy. We never heard of Cathy Ashton then, but never mind. You talk of a European foreign policy. You talk of a European army. Surely you must understand that in the face of this, the British will never accept it. And Giscard said, the British need to understand that if they don't accept this treaty, they will be relegated to the status of a country like Switzerland. So it's perfectly clear, if all we want is a free trade common market deal that many of you in this room, I suspect, voted for back in 1975, it's on offer. And it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do by business. We have got to give, especially Britain's 3.5 million small businesses, a chance to live and breathe. You cannot, as a small firm, put up with maternity rights, paternity rights, maximum working weeks, minimum wages. It all sounds lovely, doesn't it? No. But if we can't afford it, the people that actually get hurt are the workers themselves. And what we would advocate in an independent Britain is that small companies with less than 10 employees should be freed from many of these social market shackles. We have got to say that just so much of this green agenda, frankly, is rot, is costing us all a fortune on our electricity bills, and is not reducing CO2 anyway. And if there's an argument that says that the government can set up 10 or a dozen enterprise zones around the United Kingdom, why not make the whole UK economy an enterprise zone? Why not do that? None of this can be done from within the EU. And so the argument is, we're not coming out of the European Union because we can't bear it. We're coming out of the European Union because we want a better, brighter economic future. And we're coming out of the European Union because we want to take back our birthright. We want to take back that thing that those that went before us fought and defended, and in many cases sacrificed all they had to give, twice in the 20th century, not just so that we could be free people living in a democracy, but so that the whole of Europe could be free and living in a democracy. We want our country back, and we're damn well going to get it. Thank you. I've never given this answer before at any political meeting, but I'm going to give it now in answer to the Stevens challenge. In 1972, we signed up to the Treaty of Rome, which meant we were members of what has now morphed through, because it was called the EEC then, wasn't it? Do you remember? Yeah. Then it became the EC, now it's the EU, and if they have their way, it'll be the USE before very long. But we signed up in 72 to the Treaty of Rome, and what we in UKIP are advocating is that we break that treaty. But we also, in 94, signed up to another treaty That was the Treaty of the European Economic Area. That is the treaty that binds Norway into the European Union. Whilst there are some disadvantages with that treaty, in that it means being part of a single market, and it means accepting some laws over which, you're right, we wouldn't have our 8% vote. I'm not quite sure what use it is, but anyway. By breaking our membership of the Union, we would be in a holding position for a period of time of EEA membership, which would absolutely guarantee us absolute rights of trade, whilst we do what Liechtenstein, Norway and Switzerland, as tiny countries, have managed to do, whilst we managed to negotiate an even more advantageous deal for what is, after all, their biggest export market in the world. And I think that by showing the British people that by breaking with our membership of the Union, we still have that safety position of EEA membership, I think by putting that argument, and it's the first time tonight that I've used it, I think by putting that argument, as and when we get our referendum, we won't just win the referendum, we'll win it by a landslide. And that's why Cameron doesn't want us to have that referendum. Because he believes in all this baloney. And he's doing his very best to hold the line by talking about renegotiation. There's only one thing this government's really scared of, and it's UKIP getting vast numbers of votes, and we intend to go on frightening the life out of them.
But what I can't understand is this, that, you know, my father was always a trade unionist. Why is it that the trade union leaders are not looking after their workers? Surely they must have known that these jobs were going. It's no good demonstrating after. What do you think the answer is?
Yeah, well, I mean, great question. Two answers if I can. Number one, Bombardier versus Siemens. Our research has shown that Siemens spent 15 times the amount of money lobbying the European Commission in Brussels than Bombardier did. All of which goes to show this system of government where the unelected bureaucracy makes the law plays into the hands of giant business at the expense of smaller businesses every single time. So Siemens are very clever, they know what they're doing. I do feel desperately sorry for Derby, and for Bombardier, and for what's happening, and I'm not anti-competitive in any way at all, but my goodness me, unlike Gordon Brown, when we say British jobs for British workers, we damn well mean it, all right? The second part of your question is very interesting, because if you think about it, all the way through the 60s and 70s, and much of the 80s, it was the left on British politics that was opposed to the European project. They were opposed to it on the grounds we'd lose our democracy. They were opposed to it on the grounds that it would be bad for British workers. And in many ways, their most eloquent and ardent advocate was a ginger-haired fellow from South Wales. I think one or two have got who he is. Yeah, Kinnock. Kinnock was there. He was passionately opposed to this whole European project until sufficient pieces of silver were found, and that is what has happened with the British left. They have literally bought the trade union leadership. Oh, and how they enjoy their trips to Brussels and their evenings out in the nightclubs. Not that I do that sort of thing, obviously, but you know, I mean, they've literally been corrupted through money and through this European system. But just because many of the trade union leaders have been corrupted, do not think that all the trade union members and all the people on the left in this country have been corrupted. There is one shining example, and people always laugh when I say this, but I actually do have an enormous regard and respect for Bob Crow. Brother Bob, as I call him. And whatever you think of Bob Crow's economic ideas, Bob is as strongly opposed to Britain's membership of this union and as patriotic a man as you would ever meet. And I think that the British working classes have literally been betrayed, not just by their politicians, but by this European project. The total opening of the doors to completely free movements of labour into this country have damaged communities, have damaged British workers. There are some champions on the left like Bob Crow, but I would suggest to you that the real answer is that UKIP needs to be the party that stands up and fights for the hopes and aspirations of ordinary British people, and our recent results in by-elections up and down the country show the penny is beginning to drop. This isn't about right or left, this is about right or wrong. This is about us governing our own country and being the masters of our own destiny.